All right, so good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, or maybe good morning, or perhaps good evening. Depends on the time of your the time you are checking this recording in YouTube. Okay, so welcome to our next to last session of English Does Work Level 9. Okay, so according to the learning guide and according to the schedule too, today and tomorrow, today the 31st of July and tomorrow the 1st of August, we're going to study some topics that are going to help us to develop this activity, the third activity of our course, the test or questionnario. So we are going to have time to develop this test, the forum, and the video blog, the three activities we are going to present in this course until the 15th of August. So we have 15 days to complete all the activities. ¿Vale? But the learning guide says, the learning guide doesn't say a lot about the test. It only says, presente un cuestionario o evaluación en línea para evaluar su comprensión lectora, auditiva y gramatical, el cual consta de 16 preguntas y un tiempo aproximado de 90 minutos. Para entregar cuestionario en línea con preguntas de acuerdo con los temas relacionados y el componente formativo I was going to on vacations, but the pandemic hit del curso English as Work nivel 9. Para el desarrollo de la evidencia hacia el área de la actividad correspondiente y acceda al espacio cuestionario. Okay, that's everything the learning guide says about our test. So before we check some activities or some topics we can take into account to develop our test, let's go to Zayuna, as always, to check the componente formativo and the topics we can find in the componente formativo, and also the place we can present our test. So once we are in Sayuna, we click in English Does Work Level 9. Once we are in there, in the almost in the middle of the platform, we're going to find the componente formativo as I was going to go on vacations, but the pandemic hit. So once we open the componente formativo, the topics we are going to find in here are expressions in the past, expressions to indicate the future in the past, telling stories about the past, some pronunciations, and actividad didáctica. I love these actividades didácticas because they allow us, sorry, to know what's our real English comprehension or level, because it's kind of a self-assessment. It's a kind of a test from the platform to ourselves in order to know what's our level of knowledge of a specific topic. ¿Vale? So this is the componente formativo we are going to take into account to develop our test. However, I already noticed that this specific test, also takes into account the componente formativo number 1, I guess. Let me check for a second. Because the learning guide also takes into account the past progressive or past continuous tense. Yes, is the componente formativo number 1, the one that says, what did you used to do when you were bored? Because in here, I'm sorry. In here, you're going to find a grammar review, un repaso gramatical, and in here, you're going to find the present simple tense. You're going to also find the past simple tense, I guess. Let me check. Yes, simple past tense. And not only the present and past simple tense, but also past progressive tense. I didn't mention this specific topic in the first or second meeting of this course because I knew I would have to study this topic in the last activity because it's presented mostly in our test. That's why, once again, I'm going to present this activity right now. So let's remember, we are going to take into account these two componentes formativo. What did you used to do when you were bored? And additionally, the componente formativo called I was going to go on vacation, but the pandemic hit. So these two componentes formativos are going to be useful for us to develop our test. How do we present the test? Okay, let me change the role for a moment. Yeah. Once we have already studied the componentes formativos, we're going to open the link called Questionario Reading and Listening. And once we are here, we are going to click in Intento Prueba de Conocimiento. ¿Vale? Once we finish the test that is going to have 16 questions, and we are going to have 90 minutes to complete this activity, we are going to be able to check our grades in here, in the left part of the platform, in the link in the scenario, in the left part of the platform that's called Panel de Navegación. And in there, we're going to find the link called Calificaciones. Once we click in Calificaciones, we are going to be able to check our grades, not only for the test, but also for the video blog and the forum, the discussion forum. If we find an A, it's going to be that's going to mean that we have approved our evidence. And if we find a D, that's going to mean that we will have to repeat the activity because it hasn't been approved yet. Let's remember that we need to get a 70% of accuracy in our evidences in order to be able to pass this specific evidence. Okay? That means that if our test has 16 questions, 16 questions times 0.7 or 70%, it means that we need to answer correctly 12 questions, 12 over 16. ¿Vale? So to pass the test, we need to answer correctly 12 questions of our test. Okay, that's what we need to take into account according to the learning guide and according to the schedule. Therefore, today and tomorrow we are going to meet to see some topics that are going to help us to develop this activity. And once again, let's remember that we are going to have until the 15th of August to complete the video blog, the forum, and the test. Okay, okay, so that's about everything we are going to need about the schedule and also about the learning guides. So thank you very much to these two documents, and let's go with our topic. Goodbye, Zayuna, too. And let's go here. All right, let's begin with the past continuous tense or the past progressive tense. This is something we should have studied in week number 1. However, once again, I noticed that some of the sentences in the test you're going to take until the 15th are going to be mentioned in past progressive tense. That's why I didn't explain again because this is a topic from level 2, I guess, or level 4, something like that. This is something I wanted to explain now and not in a previous session because of the importance for this test. So let's go with past progressive then. To understand the past progressive tense, also known as past continuous tense, we need to understand the difference between action verbs or movement verbs or dynamic verbs, because this is exactly the same, and stative verbs. Action verbs and stative verbs are different. Why are they called action verbs? Well, it's easy. It's because they or these verbs describe actions performed physically or mentally by a person, animal, or object. The subject must be moving, so this is a physical movement. So if this person or the subject is moving, then we are in front of an action verb. Additionally, it doesn't matter if there is an additional situation. Perhaps the subject is not going to move or at least we are not going to be able to see him moving or see her moving. However, if this person, in this case, we are talking about person or people, sorry, or animals, they are thinking on something, they are imagining something, they are planning on to do something, they are doing something with their minds. And these kind of activities are also known as action verbs or dynamic verbs or movement verbs. Not only is not mentioned, is not related only to activities that you perform with your body, but also with your mind, with your brains. Okay? So examples of these activities are running, thinking, and saying, for example. On the other hand, we also have stative verbs. What is an stative verb, by the way? An stative verb is related to thoughts, opinions, feelings, emotions, senses, perceptions, possession, and measurement. So, in other words, they describe existence, states of existence. So it's kind of saying yes or no. For example, the verb to be. You are tall or you are not tall, for example, or you have a bicycle or you don't have bicycle, or you look angry or you don't look angry. So it's kind of a yes no situation. This is an stative verb. It mentions a yes no situation, and an action verb includes movement from your body or maybe something related with your mind. So this is the past progressive or past continuous tense. This is something we need to take into account, sorry, to study the past progressive or the past continuous tense. This is the first information, the first important information we need to take into account. Wait a minute. I need to remember something. Well, once we know this, we know, once we understand this, we know that we cannot say something like this. I was being stressed yesterday. In Spanish could be like estaba estando estresado. Even in Spanish sounds weird because the verb to be is not a movement verb, it's a stative verb. Therefore, it's not compatible with any continuous tense. Doesn't matter if it's present progressive, past progressive, future progressive, and so on. In this case, we are not going to be able to use it. For instance, we are going to use a bigger, wider tense. In this case, it's a closest cousin is going to be the past simple tense. In this case, we could say, I was stressed yesterday. And this is correct. This is coherent. Estaba estresado versus estaba estando estresado. Weird. Another example. I was knowing all the answers. Or you know the answers, or you don't know the answers. The verb to know is an stative verb. So therefore we cannot say that. It's like in Spanish, it's like we were saying like, estaba conociendo las respuestas o estaba sabiendo las respuestas. Doesn't sound correct, right? Instead, we're going to use simple past tense to use these stative verbs. For example, after I studied, I knew all the answers. Después de que estudié, supe las respuestas. Yo sabía las respuestas, if you prefer another translation. Okay, so these movement verbs are going to be modified. We're going to add the ing ending to these verbs because this verb is going to be the main verb. However, we are going to also need an auxiliary verb. We're going to check that in a moment. The ing ending is going to allow us to say something like ando, endo, yendo, trabajando, corriendo, riendo, and so on. So we are always going to add ing at the end of the verb. However, we are not in Disney, therefore we are going to add some additional information, some exceptions, some other rules. Because if our verb ends in E and the E doesn't sound like dance, create, a love, a love is a stated verb, but sometimes some people say loving, so I'm going to mention it like an example. But create, dance, make, for example, they all end in E, but the E doesn't sound. Therefore, the E is going to be deleted. For example, make, making. The third rule, okay, if our verb ends in consonant, vowel, consonant, the last consonant is going to be doubled. So W, consonant, I, vowel, and M, once again, a consonant. Therefore, we double the M. This is not going to happen if our verb is an X, Y, or W. And the last rule is that if we have this IE ending, this IE ending is going to be modified by Y. This is what we are going to do with our dynamic verb. Okay, we already have the main verb. Let's go now with the application, the applicability of past progressive or past continuous tense. Because we already have the main raw material, the main verb. Now we are going to focus in the rest of the grammatical information we are going to need to develop to create this past progressive tense. Let's begin first with the applicability. Why do we use past progressive tense? Well, we are going to use past progressive tense to mention that a big activity in the past was interrupted by a smaller activity also in the past. The bigger activity, the activity that was interrupted, is going to be mentioned in past simple tense. I'm sorry, the big activity is going to be mentioned in past progressive tense. And the activity that's going to be interrupting the main activity is going to be mentioned with past simple tense. Okay? Um, by the way, it not only needs to be an activity that's going to be interrupting the main scenario, the main situation, but also can be a moment in the time. So at 3 p.m., at 2 o'clock, in the morning, and so on. However, the big activity is going to be mentioned in past progressive tense. For example, I was walking to the station when I met John. This is a big activity. I was walking. The activity that interrupts this action, this big scenario, is that I met John, I greeted him, and then I went to have a coffee with him. So the activity of going to the station, to the train station, was interrupted, stopped. ¿Vale? Another situation, another example could be at 3 o'clock, they were working, or they were working at 3 o'clock. This is the main activity, to work. And this is interrupted by a specific moment in the time at 3 o'clock. Because at 4 o'clock, they were not working, they were taking a break, let's suppose. Or they were drinking a cup of coffee. Or they were attending a meeting. I don't know, something different, right? First scenario. Second scenario, we also use past progressive tense to mention that many activities, a parallel or a series of activities or actions, were happening in the past at the same time. So at 3 p.m. or at 5:40 a.m. or in the morning today, I was studying, my sister was reading, and my cousin was watching TV at the same time and the same place, for example. Another example, while Helen was reading, Tim was watching television. Two activities happening at the same time in the same place. At least two. It could be 4, 7, 20, 51 activities, doesn't matter. Second scenario, second situation. Let's go with the third situation. Why do we use past progressive tense? Well, we are going to use past continuous tense or past progressive tense, that's exactly the same, to mention repetition, the repetition for a temporary habit in the past, something that happened for a specific moment of time in the past, for a period of time in the past, in an intense way, but it didn't last a lot. It lasted for a moment, maybe 1 month, maybe 1 day, maybe 1 year, maybe 6 months, doesn't matter, but in a very intense way, right? It was very repeated. However, it didn't last too much because it started in the past, it finished in the past, it lasted for 3, 4 months in an intense way, but that's it. It finished. ¿Vale? So that's why we use words like always, constantly, or forever to mention this intensity of these actions. Example, when I was 11 years old, I'm mentioning this weird example. It's not real, but it could be an example. When I was 11 years old, my parents were constantly arguing about money because my father lost his job, for example, let's suppose, and my mother was not earning a lot, for example. So this happened in a year, in a full year, or maybe for 9 months or 10 months or 15 months, doesn't matter, but it lasted for a period of time. Fourth situation, we use past progressive tense to emphasize that something lasted for a while in the past, or continued for some time once again in the past. I mean, if we want to focus in the action to work in this case, we are going to use past simple tense. If we want to focus in the duration of the activity for 6 months, for 3 hours, all day, all the morning, from Monday to Wednesday, and so on, we are going to use past progressive tense. Because we could say, we worked in the garden all day, and we were working in the garden all day. Both possibilities are acceptable. However, if we say we worked in the garden all day, we are focusing in the activity that we were doing this. We were working, we were not playing, we were not singing, we were not chatting. However, if we say we were working in the garden all day, we are focusing in the time. The time is important here. And finally, let's go with the last reason why we study past progressive tense. To make polite requests. In this case, using the word wonder, preguntarse. For example, I was wondering if you could babysit for me tonight. Me preguntaba si podrías hacer esto. How does this work? Well, we already know why is this important. Now we are going to focus in. We already answered the question why. We are now going to focus in the question how. How is this going to? How are we going to use this specific tense? How does this work? Well, as we mentioned before, we need the verb to be because we are going to have two verbs, an auxiliary verb that's going to be the verb to be, and the main verb. The main verb, we already mentioned it, is going to be an action verb, a verb that's going to be modified with the ing ending, ando, endo, yendo. In this case, the verb to be is going to be mentioned in past because this is a past progressive tense. Therefore, the way we understand we are in front of a past situation is by checking the verb to be. Let's remember that the verb to be in its past form is going to be mentioned as was or were. Was for I, Mario, Catalina, and the snail. and were for everybody else. I mean, was for singulars and were for plurals. Taking into account that you can be singular and plural, but we're going to take into account, or we're going to think that this is plural for grammar situations. If we compare Spanish with past progressive tense, we're going to find something similar, that the organization is pretty much the same. In Spanish, we say, yo estaba jugando fútbol. Yo estaba, I was, jugando, playing football, soccer. Yesterday in the morning, for example. This was happening yesterday. Okay? Or for example, my head was aching. Everyone was shouting. My head was aching. This is something that was happening in the past for a period of time because everyone was shouting. Or if we add this new information, we say that this activity and this other activity were happening at the same time. So there is a series of activities happening at the same moment in the past. Both happening here, head aching and everybody shouting. Those two activities were happening in the past. Negative sentences. As we compare Spanish with English, we all only need to add the word no in Spanish or not in English. In Spanish we say, yo no estaba, o bueno, Mariana no estaba manejando el carro. Mariana was not manejando, driving el carro, the car, for example. So the organization is once again the same, almost the same, because the verb to be and the word not have different positions between Spanish and English. Okay? The example, I wasn't watching TV when she called. In this case, the big activity, watch TV. The activity that interrupts the main activity is the phone call when she called. And the question, like in Spanish, we reorganize the sentence. ¿Estaban sus abuelos durmiendo a las 3 de la tarde del día de ayer? Estaban sus abuelos. Were your grandparents durmiendo, sleeping, ayer, yesterday, and so on, right? The same organization we have in Spanish is the same organization we have in English. So pretty much the same, right? In this case, for example, the couple discussion between a couple where the man says to the woman, or vice versa, doesn't matter, were you listening while he was talking? Or in the class, for example? Let's suppose this. What do we need to take into account here? If we compare past progressive tense with past simple tense verb to be, yes, here it is that past progressive tense and past simple tense verb to be are very similar, right? Compared this blue part with this pink part. Subject was were, subject was were. Negatives. Subject was not, were not, subject was not, were not. Questions was, were, and subject was, were, and subject. What do we change? What's the change we take into account between simple past tense and past continuous tense? Well, in the past continuous tense, we add the main verb, the action verb with the ending ing. In terms of grammar, this is the difference between verb to be and past progressive tense. Obviously, the reasons why we study one or the other are going to change too, but in terms of grammar, this is the difference. Now we are going to continue with something additional. In the learning guide and in Zajuna too, let me check. Let's see if we can get inside here. here it goes. So. Wait a minute, please. Wait a minute. Yeah. When we go to the componente formativo, I was going to on vacations. We are going to find something interesting. A very interesting topic, in fact. In my opinion, is a very, very interesting topic. How to express, how to indicate the future in the past. This is very interesting. How to mention that we were going to do something, but it didn't happen. So yesterday, I was thinking that perhaps tomorrow I could do that. I could do this. I could go anywhere. So this is something very interesting. How to indicate the future in the past. We are going to express this right now, and this is something that we are going to check in the test very often. And this is a very interesting topic. I had never used it before, but I found it very important to understand. So was going to, or we're going to, let's remember that was is going to be used with I, he, she, it, and where for everybody else. I mean, we, you, they. This expression or this phrase expresses a future plan, intention, or predictive or prediction from a past perspective. Something that last week, last month, last hour, yesterday, something I wanted to do in that specific or moment of time in the past. That's something that we expected to do, but it didn't happen. It didn't necessarily happen. So it indicates something that was expected to happen in the future from the perspective of yesterday, but might not have. Or if you prefer, we are going to use was going to or were going to mention something that was planned but didn't occur, didn't happen. So once again, last week I was thinking that perhaps next Saturday I could go to Brazil. That was my expectation from the yesterday's point, from last week's point of view. How does this work? Because this is the explanation of how why do we use this specific phrase. The structure is this. For affirmative sentences, we need a person who was going to do something, but didn't do it. So in this case, we are going to need I or he or she or it was going to and the main verb. For example, I was going to ask you something. For example, iba a preguntarte algo. So I wanted to ask you this. However, I didn't do it because I forgot what to ask you, or I discovered the answer, or I figured out this was not important. So in the morning, or 2 hours ago, or yesterday, or last year, I wanted to do this, but I didn't do it. How could be if the subject changes? If it's not I, if the subject is, for example, we, or they, or you, okay? The only thing that changes is the verb to be. In this case, and obviously the person. For example, we could say, for example, with you or with they were going to ask you something. The only change is in the verb to be. Okay, so once again, we're focusing in an action from the past. I mean, say we are focusing in an action that happened in the past with a perception of something of that something would happen in the future. Okay? For negative sentences, like in past progressive tense, we are only going to add the word not after the verb to be. So was not, were not, or wasn't and weren't. For example, in this case, I wasn't going to tell you, or you weren't going to tell them. Tú no les ibas a decir. Yo no te iba a decir la respuesta, la verdad, or whatever. How do we create questions? The same we do with past progressive tense, with verb to be, with simple present tense, with past perfect, with past perfect progressive, with future progressive tense, and so on. We're going to use the auxiliary verb at the beginning of the question, similar to Spanish. Were you going to show me? ¿Ibas a mostrármelo? Right? Or was she going to show you your house? Was she going to show you her house? I'm sorry. ¿Iba ella a mostrarte su casa? ¿De quién? De ella, right? The same we do in every single verbal tense. I mean, the replacement of words, the substitution of words, is something that we are going to also do with this expression, was going to. And the translation, once again, is very similar to Spanish. Te lo iba a preguntar. Is the idea I had in the past, but it didn't happen. So it didn't have a succeed, right? So this is the expression was going to or were going to. On the other hand, a very similar expression is was supposed to or were supposed to. Once again, was for I, he, she, it, and were for we, you, and they. But in this case, we are going to express not a future plan or intention or a prediction from the past perspective. We're not predicting the future, we're not using plans in the future, but instead we are focusing in expectations, obligations, or plans. Once again, from the idea to the past, from the perspective or the scenario of the past, taking into account what could happen in the future. But once again, normally this activity in the future didn't happen. It's a common situation. So indicates an expectation, obligation, or plan that was intended to happen, but did not happen, or is not currently happening. So the scenario is the same. We are using the past to predict something in the future, but this situation didn't happen. Was going to focuses in plans, intentions, or predictions, but supposed to focuses in expectations, obligations, and plans. This is more formal if you prefer to use the word formal. It's kind of mandatory if you prefer, and this is for more personal. This is more objective, and this is more subjective if you prefer to. And in terms of organization, in terms of grammar, is going to be pretty much the same. The only difference between supposed to and going to is this, that we are going to replace going to for supposed to, because the organization is going to be, again, the same. They were supposed to finish the project by Friday. Se suponía que ellos iban a finalizar el proyecto para el viernes. Se suponía, I mean, we are taking into account a perspective from the past, predicting something for the future, but this didn't happen, right? So the organization, once again, is exactly the same. Person, verb to be was or were, sorry. And instead of saying going to, we are going to use supposed to. Supposed to do what? Or going to do what? An activity. ask, invest, believe, create whatever that we wanted to make, whatever we're going to focus in. They were supposed to finish the project. For negative sentences, like many other verbal tenses, we add the word not. In this case, the package was not supposed to arrive until Monday. And for questions, we only replace or make a substitution between the verb to be and the person. Example, was he supposed to meet us at the restaurant? Yes, no, depends on the situation. So the difference between was going to and was supposed to, or the plural forms were going to and were supposed to, is not related to grammar because the grammar is pretty much the same. The only thing we need to take into account is that we are going to replace supposed for going to in terms of grammar. However, in terms of applicability, the difference is that was going to or we're going to is going to focus in plans or intentions that were not carried out, and was supposed to or were supposed to is focused in obligations, rules, or expectations that once again were not carried out or were not met. Example between these two phrases. I was going to call you, but my phone died. Iba a llamarte, pero mi teléfono se murió, así que no lo hice. Versus, I was supposed to finish the report by Friday, but I didn't have time. Se suponía que iba a terminar el reporte para el viernes, es una obligación, ¿no? Pero no tuve tiempo, no lo hice. ¿Sí? So this is the difference between these two sentences. Was going to and was supposed to. Was going to is focusing plans and intentions, and was supposed to is focused in obligations, rules, and expectations. Once again, the grammar is pretty much the same. The only difference is that we are going to substitute supposed to for going to, but that's it. And for both scenarios, we want to predict something in the future from a past perspective. Therefore, this action in the future didn't succeed, didn't have a happy ending, if you prefer to, if you want to use this expression. All right, so this is everything for today, for today's lesson. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to complete some exercises, some games I had prepared for you, but maybe next time we will be able to play them. Maybe next time. So that's all for today. I appreciate your attendance or your that you can that you see the video present this recording in YouTube, and that's it. I wish you an excellent rest of the day. I hope to see you next time. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me through the forums or via email. Thank you very much for coming, guys, and see you next time.